Our guys were back in Iowa. It's still late season, cold as the dickens, but that's what's getting the deer moving in this episode. And I'm really excited to be able to talk about the breakdown of this actual farm itself, because it's a producer. But guess what? We make changes, and we still make changes. So Iowa in late season, though, is something special. Wow.
With a gun in hand.
With a gun in hand. Yes, this is a mid-December, so a second shotgun opportunity, and so that's the time of the year most of the rutting activity from camera observations and in the field is really subsided. There's a little bit of bumping of some does that we've seen during the first morning hunt, but then really it was pretty much a bed to food pattern that we were hunting from a strategy standpoint.
What I'm anxious to hear is you've hunted this spot, was it 2 years in a row?
Yes.
2 years in a row, and you've actually revamped it, made some serious improvements based on observations and reveal cameras and intel, and now your experience going into this fall was, from what I understand, way better from the previous year as far as deer density, deer activity, and deer movement.
Yeah, there was some difficulty in accessing the way the farm hunted with no manipulation, right? So the farm was purchased in an October time frame, so we pretty much just hunted it as it is. Moved in a couple blinds, left some standing grain 2021, and just tried to make our best approach, but didn't go in incredibly aggressive in manipulating anything prior to that late season scenario. So pretty much just hunted it and observed it as it was.
Which is a very common practice in good states, good regions of the world.
Is.
You roll in
100%.
And you leave some grain, and you're like,
we're good.
This farm is amazing.
Yeah, we're good.
Yeah. The age structure of the cameras, there was great deer there.
And that is management that you're managing to harvest the best deer in the neighborhood, while when you roll in with really big plans, habitat manipulation, you're trying to increase the size of the deer, the inches of
the
antler.
age structure.
You're trying to change it to where it's like, it was good, but now we've really got some big deer.
And I think I know we're all the same when we're sitting in a blind scenario or tree stand. You're observing, you're constantly thinking, okay, how do I make this better? And then that to-do list just starts to grow, right?
Right.
Like you're in the fall, but you're planning what you're going to do in the winter and the spring and summer months. Well, that's the way it was in 2021, and we were able to harvest some great deer, but it just did not hunt as efficiently or effectively as we know it could. So what we're looking at, on X is one of the biggest main portions that we saw of the farm that just didn't hunt well was this area in the kind of this elbow macaroni shaped field, the purple area. That's where deer just hung out. A lot of them came in from the east and from the north.
Now, that whole field is a cornfield, correct?
That is a cornfield, yep.
Yeah.
But standing grain had been left on the south end down here in 2021. So a good long ways, and there had been a blind that the previous owners had left about here. So you could be able to see up and around that corner and observe deer, but because there had been corn and a crop planted back in this elbow, you couldn't see it from any direction. It was very secure. So deer just hung out back there, and with being shotgun season limited on range, they were well out of range.
Right.
And so they just staged up there, and it'd be a great advantageous place for a deer to do that, but that wasn't great for us as hunters, right?
But you had to give up half the field just to get to where you could see that back corner.
Exactly. And there was no good way to get to that location. Honestly, one of the strategies the first year hunted it was drive in a tractor, get dropped off, because, deer used to the tractor, the diesel humming, and we get dropped off and then get picked back up.
Sure.
I don't like that scenario,
right.
and especially with them hanging back there. So in.
So the purple field is what was left and where you ended up hunting this fall, correct?
Nope.
No.
What we ended up doing, because we didn't want to be that aggressive and move past and put so much quality habitat behind us, what we ended up doing was taking that completely out of production. So we chose to not plant that and allow succession and weeds and growth to go and grow up in there. And so deer weren't staging and feeding back there during daylight.
So you basically forced them forward.
Forced them forward. And so what we did then was leave in brown in 2022, this season that we're watching and reviewing this hunt from, is we left standing grain in the 2 brown areas. And so essentially a smaller patch, about an acre to acre and a half, was left for earlier in the season, and then this larger, farther south was going to be left essentially more for once the smaller section had been consumed for muzzleloader. But
Matt, can you quickly pull up the tools and give me a line of distance from the blind to a straight across the field?
To the standing grain?
To the edge line.
Of the field.
Yeah, due east. So
how wide's the field?
140.
Okay. So I think that's one thing that we want to touch on is this is a perfect gun location.
Oh, it's a dream scenario.
Because you've got edge lines that are all within gun range.
Mm-hmm.
So when they come out and they love to walk edges, guess what? Every edge, they're in trouble.
Range. It's all within range. The biggest downfall to it was this back corner. And we had to take that out of production, just say, hey, when you step in this field, you're going to be essentially within range, or you take another 50 yards into this field, and you're essentially going to get within range.
And I noticed one thing, that you didn't just take that out of production, but you also brought the bedding cut south as well. So it was
1,000%.
We're gonna bring the bedding south, we're gonna bring the food south, and we're going to leave that area that was hard to get to alone and let that grow up in great summer forage. So ultimately, by letting it go into early succession, we're knowing that that's a bunch of weeds that is highly preferred during early summer and through the summer, to where that will just turn into cover during later in the fall. So they have to come south to be out in that, to get that standing grain.
Correct.
Was it a hard discussion to pull that tillable from the landowner, to pull that out of production from a cash return standpoint?
Yes, the long term is to go into CRP with that, so there'll be some still retained income with those acres, and just not forage. But essentially,
which will increase bedding as well.
Correct. Yeah. But like Adam said, is we wanted to pull not only the resources of feeding farther south, because you enter this farm from the south, we pulled bedding to then make sure that we had plenty enough daylight activity on this field. Because if we didn't change bedding and we just changed food, then we'd probably experience a much later evening activity. So we pulled not only food resources south, but we pulled bedding south too, and cut these areas in during the summer of 2022, leading into this fall that we're watching this hunt unfold.
One question I have is, so those brown areas, that's where you left standing corn, I'm assuming.
Yes.
Right? Talk about like your idea to leave those specific areas standing, and why you did that, and what the hunting strategy was behind it.
So we knew that there was always, this farm itself was 130 acres. Not great, huge sized, right? So we knew we were pulling deer from neighboring places, on top of holding a lot of does on this field. We're in close proximity. So we did want to leave a smaller portion farther to the north, because we knew there had been in years past a lot of deer coming from the north side. So we left that there. But when you zoom into this field itself, you start to see in the terrain itself, that's a lower area, and you can kind of see it in the footage as well. That's a low spot in the field, and it's out of the wind completely. And it still has a lot of security, because
which is huge for late season, because you get them out of the wind.
Yes. I mean, the day that harvested this deer, it was blowing 30 to 40 miles an hour. But in this valley, you can see relatively how calm those deer are.
They were.
The corn stalks on the sides of these fields with high spot, man, they're blowing, and it's getting after it. But that particular area, late season cold, it was out of the wind, and that's huge from a feeding location standpoint, that hey, they just want to get out of the wind. They've been probably battling a lot.
The other thing, if you want to blow it out a little bit so we can see both the standing corn sections, I love the strategy, because you've got 2 standing corn locations, which is going to cause them to go between the two.
Yes.
You've created a transition zone, and oh, by the way, you're smack dab in the middle, and then on top of it, they're going to be broadside, because they're going to and from those 2 locations.
We saw a ton of activity, because at the same time frame, it had been freshly, basically just ran over on the northern section. They were feeding there a lot early, and then eventually, slowly after dark, getting down to the one to the south. But we were able to slip back out before they ever got down there to the south. But if we had wanted to see that exchange, we're prime in the spot for it.
But you created movement
Yes.
between two spots, which is probably going to happen in daylight hours.
Mm-hmm.
That's the favorite strategy that I love. And then you're smart enough to figure out that, hey, one of these is going to be in a lower spot because typically late season it's cold and windy.
Yes.
And so you've given multiple reasons to be there. It was genius move.
And there is
What wind are you hunting that blind on?
a lot of north and a lot of northwest. But the way that you have a really steep ridge, it doesn't operate like a perfect north would blow in there. A lot of it kind of wraps around and essentially acts more like a northeast.
Because
in this
of the
blind.
terrain.
East-northeast, yes.
It'd have to be. I look at that going, we're threading it. It better
yeah.
be northeast in
But
that one.
the way that if you look to the left of this blind here, it's a steep ridge, and there's some footage of the deer filmed up on the actual high ridge, and it's a very narrow ridge line, but open grass ridge. I mean, it is steeper than horse's face from where we're at in the blind in that bottom field to where those deer are in the footage. So it just forces that wind to wrap around. So, yeah, you would sit here and look at this and be like, northwest, there's no way, but the way the wind just operates in this field, it pretty much, when it comes out north, it's going to operate like northeast.
So the size of plot that you left standing to the north was what, acre and a half?
That's 2.5 acres.
So I think that's another, tip that we need to talk about is if you're going to leave food, you got to leave enough to sustain, because if not, you've wasted your efforts.
Yes.
No doubt.
Yeah. Yes.
Especially if you guys are gearing this set purely for late season. I mean,
Correct.
that's where you're planning on hunting this. And so make sure that, for those guys that are watching, you've got to leave enough so that it makes it through that season. So when you want to go hunt it, there's enough there.
All right, we just gave away all the details of how this hunt went down, but check out the link to see it in real time.